After all that has happened, after just 1 week of President Trump being back in office, I feel compelled to offer a few words of pastoral reflection during this time of joys and sorrows. As I was reflecting on what might be helpful to share, an old book sprang to mind. It's titled, "Amusing Ourselves to Death: Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business." Have any of you read it? Okay, I don't see any hands. It was published 40 years ago in 1985 by the late Neil Postman, who was a professor at New York University and founded their media ecology program. Professors who have been assigning this book for decades to their classes report that students over the years have become more responsive to it, not less. This book was so ahead of its time that it's become increasingly relevant with each passing year. In 1985, when Postman published this book, he was tracing the ways that television in our culture was helping, that the worst influences of television were helping create the conditions in which someone like Ronald Reagan, this former Hollywood actor, could be elected to their second term in office. Postman was also extrapolating about the trends that, he couldn't foresee Donald Trump in particular, but the trends that in general could create the conditions in which a con artist like Donald Trump, a former reality TV star, could be elected president not once, but now twice. Postman foresaw some of the ways in which our world has been shaped by technology that are now orders of magnitude more insidious and pernicious than television, such as social media and artificial intelligence. I have a sermon forthcoming on AI in March. I can't get into that right now. I may also plan an upcoming sermon, a full sermon on Postman's book. For now, I'm just going to share with you one small section of that book that prompted me to pick it back up again this week. He makes a vitally important argument about why we as a culture are better prepared to fend off the dystopia predicted by George Orwell's 1984 and much less prepared to fend off the dystopia predicted by Aldous Huxley's A Brave New World. So it's not that Orwell isn't a concern. There's some real Orwellian things going down right now, so that is a concern, but that we're under-prepared for Huxley, even more so. So this is Postman's words. In Postman's words, Orwell warns that we will be overcome by an externally imposed oppression. But in Huxley's vision, no big brother is required to deprive people of their autonomy, maturity, and history. As Huxley saw it, people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. Facebook, for example, we all know how, if you post one thing, no one sees it. If you post some things, everyone sees it, and so we know it's terrible. We know it's giving money to Zuckerberg, who's making terrible decisions right now. And it's also I can't quit you, because it also provides community. TikTok, we know, is being controlled by an authoritarian Chinese government, but people are I can't quit you. We feel like we need it. And I understand, there are positive and negatives to all of these things. So Postman continues. What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. What Huxley feared is there would be no reason to ban books, for no one would want to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much information we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. I feel so accurate today. Orwell feared that truth would be again concealed from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared we would become a trivial culture. Orwell feared the spirit of our culture would shrivel to a prison. Huxley feared the spirit of our culture would shrivel into a burlesque. Trump's style is in so many ways a burlesque. His constant exaggeration, his emphasis on spectacle, his mockery and caricature, his rejection of norms, his distortions of reality. As Huxley remarked in Brave New World Revisited, the civil libertarians and rationalists who are ever on the alert for tyranny, and rightly so, thank you, but they failed to take into account humanity's almost infinite appetite for distractions. We are a distracted culture. Again, that feels so spot on. In 1984, people are controlled by inflicting pain. In Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure. In short, Orwell feared that what we hate will ruin us. Huxley feared that what we love will ruin us. This book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, is about the possibility that Huxley, not Orwell, was the most right. And when I saw all those tech billionaires seated front and center at Trump's inauguration, doing exactly what we know not to do, which is obeying in advance, the CEOs of Facebook, Instagram, Amazon, Google, Tesla, Apple, OpenAI, TikTok, I thought, I've got to reread Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death. I should add that Postman didn't think the Luddite solution would work, convincing people to just give up technology. He didn't think that had any chance of working beyond a minuscule percentage of the population. The only answer Postman himself thought had any chance of working was high-quality education. He says, what I suggest here as a solution is what Aldous Huxley suggested, and I can do no better. He believed with H.G. Wells that we are in a race between education and disaster. And he wrote continuously about the necessity of our understanding the politics and the epistemology of media. Epistemology just means, how does media operate? How do we know what media, and what does media want us to know and not know? In the end, Huxley was trying to tell us that what afflicted the people of Brave New World was not that they were laughing instead of thinking, but that they did not know any longer why they were laughing or why they had stopped thinking. Are we using social media and artificial intelligence, and/or are we being used by it? We desperately need free college for all in the same way we have K-12. It's just K-12 is not sufficient anymore to navigate this world and for people to have the critical thinking. We desperately need to pay teachers so much more to incentivize the best and brightest to be teachers. I would be remiss in the wake of this hard week, however, if I just left you with dystopian warnings of a future that could be, so I'll end here. In 1962, the year before Huxley died, he published a final novel called Island, much less well known, but quite important. It's his utopian vision of a world that also could be. The choice is ours. It tells the story of a culture that learned to holistically blend the best of technology and spirituality so that we could use technology, not just be used by it. A culture that used psychedelics as a catalyst for spiritual awakening and social bonding, not drugs as escapism, and sought to build a sustainable ecological economy. It's a vision of what we humans could achieve if we were to collectively prioritize wisdom, compassion, and holistic development over materialism and narcissistic power struggles. There'll be a lot more to say and do in the coming days. Again, stay for the 10:30 middle hour for the Democracy Action Team, either online or on Zoom if you can. For now, and especially in this hard time, I am grateful to be on this journey with all of you in this community that is dedicated to lifelong learning and of conspiring together to build the better world we dream about. May it be so, and may we each do what we can within our spheres of influence, as Bishop Buddy showed us how to do, to act within our spheres of influence, to turn our dreams into deeds.
It has been a joy to work with Emily and with Nick and Deb in planning this service. Thank you. The time frame for most of what you'll be hearing, seeing, and singing today took place in the 16th century, 450 years ago, approximately. One exception is the choir's first piece. That piece was composed by Hildegard von Bingen, a Catholic nun who wrote those words approximately 1,000 years ago, in Latin, of course. Latin was, by decree, the only language of the Catholic Mass then, and for the next 1,000 years. In this country, Latin continued to be the language of the Mass until the 1960s. God is speaking in the first person singular in Hildegard's piece. I am that great and fiery force. One God, one force, how Unitarian. My intention this morning is to provide a history of mostly 16th century works, using illustrations from art, including portraits of the people discussed, and some architecture and examples of the choral music, as you've heard, and the spoken word. 3 categories: Reformation, Counter-Reformation, and Radical Reformation. These labels have long been used to describe time frames bracketing religious events in the 16th century alone. This last term, Radical Reformation, refers to our history as Unitarians, not to be confused with Universalism. I find it helpful to identify Universalism with the Transcendentalists and Walden Pond, Thoreau walking around Walden Pond, and Emerson in the woods, and the Transcendentalists in this country in the 19th century. Today's focus is on these 3 reformations in Europe, including Hungary and part of Romania we know as Transylvania, and the developments that led to the Edict of Torda in 1568. But first, before getting into Unitarian history and these 3 reformations, to get an idea of the ordinary lives of the citizens of Northern Europe in the 16th century, to set the scene, here are 2 paintings by Peter Bruegel that show us more or less how people spent their time. These are dancers at a wedding. And this one, I don't know if you can see this clearly, these are some agrarian folks who are walking down a road. So what were they saying? Who knows? What we do know is they weren't speaking Latin. This is a map of Europe, which shows, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it's meant to show which areas of Europe are Roman Catholic in 1648. Still solidly Catholic are Portugal, Spain, Italy, and a lot of France. The section marked Holy Roman Empire is the area we know as Germany, and in the north of the area, you might be able to spot Wittenberg. I circled it. It was a dot, and I circled that dot. Can you see that Wittenberg there? Okay, good. That's important. That's a Lutheran stronghold. Reformed areas are indicated with stripes. Now, if you look south and east to where I've drawn a couple of rectangles there, if you can see those, around Transylvania and Hungary. These are radical Reformed areas that I'll talk about later. In the centuries before Reformation, when most people would have identified as Roman Catholic, people weren't perfect. Well, raise your hand if you are. I'm not. And they believed they were going to go to a nowhere place forever called purgatory. This is one artist's view. That wasn't quite hell, but it wasn't heaven either. With art like this, the Catholic Church convinced them that they could purchase their way out of purgatory and into heaven. Martin Luther and other Catholic priests like Luther, they dared to question this dogma, that a purgatory of endless torment awaited you if you sinned during your life, unless you bought your way out of that nasty place and made payment to the church, a payment called an indulgence. Or you or someone else on your behalf could prepay your salvation with a purchase of indulgences. Or you could pay a sort of get out of purgatory card for somebody already dead. These payments made Fugger and the Catholic Church very rich. Who's Fugger? This is Jacob Fugger. In northern Germany in the 16th century, this man, Jacob Fugger, was a moneylender and financier who was an important go-between the people in their payment of indulgences and Pope Leo in Rome. The Fugger family handled financial transfers for the church as early as 1476. Pope Leo X, who financed the building of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, that's who they worked with, the Fuggers and Pope Leo X. The most famous, this is Pope Leo X. The most famous of these financial dealings occurred in 1516 when the Fuggers loaned a substantial sum to a wannabe bishop to actually buy the role of bishop. The new bishop sold indulgences to pay back the loan, and the Fuggers transferred the proceeds to Rome. This transfer of indulgence money was an everyday business deal for the Fuggers, but the sales had unintended consequences. The exploitative marketing campaign employed to sell the indulgences so bothered Martin Luther that he was compelled to write his 95 Theses, lighting the fuse of the Protestant Reformation. This very powerful man, this Jacob Fugger, oh, that's not Jacob Fugger, that's Jacob Fugger, was corrupt and said to be the richest man who ever lived, and to have gained much by collecting indulgences from the poor. And yet, I guess he wasn't all bad. When the Fugger headquarters were in Augsburg, Germany, he built housing for the workers, an apartment complex called the Fuggerei. Maybe some of you have visited that. It's not too far from Munich. If you take a Bavarian tour, sometimes it's on the tour. It's still there. I think you can even stay there. It might be a B&B. He charged his workers almost nothing to live there. Martin Luther was not the only Catholic priest who objected to this corruption on the part of Fugger and the Pope. But he was the most famous because he was the most effective. These are the theses on the Wittenberg Castle Church door. When the Pope was informed that Martin Luther had posted his theses, Martin Luther's objections to the collection of indulgences, Martin Luther, Catholic priest and biblical scholar and translator of biblical text, became the Pope's #1 enemy. The Pope had been making fabulous use of all the money that wannabe bishops paid to become bishop, and even more thousands from the masses of worried Catholics of Europe who were paying to avoid going to purgatory when they died. Funds from the collection of indulgences went into building this large and expensive building, St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and helped to furnish the inside with its statuary and create this famous dome. The counter-revolution. Martin Luther became very well known for his biblical scholarship. He translated the Bible into the vernacular, into German. And now people could read it for the very first time. Scholars and non-scholars alike eagerly read what Luther published, and he published widely. The printing press boomed. The printing business, it just boomed. Every mid to large city had a printing press. People were reading the newly translated Bible for the first time and realizing, with Luther's help, that there was no such thing as purgatory. Pope Leo X became alarmed. He needed to counter Luther's words with words and actions of his own, and he began an anti-Reformation, censorship, and propaganda campaign, including issuing this declaration, this document called a bull. By 1521, there were over 300,000 Lutheran books and pamphlets in circulation in Europe. While control of printing was crucial to the success of the Pope's anti-Reformation efforts, most printing companies were sympathetic to the reformers and not to the Pope, not to the Catholic clergy. The Pope could not control the printers, and the Vatican had no central bureau for censorship. And the Vatican did not even sponsor any public debates. To debate, quote, to debate with Protestants would mean that there were issues to discuss. Any such dialogue would grant credibility and legitimacy to their claims. So, Pope Leo X used the printed bull, that looked like that, to vent his anger at what was happening. Martin Luther and other reformers were taking over. This document was an angry letter where he shows irritation at his own Catholic clergy for not being more effective in bringing down Martin Luther. He resorts to insulting Catholic clergy by calling them dumb dogs that cannot bark. A chubby guy that insults people remind you of anybody? He reminds them that he had ordered Martin Luther's books to be burned. Then he orders excommunication on all the dumb dogs in his clergy who follow and protect Martin Luther instead of burning his books. After Pope Leo excommunicates Martin Luther at the Diet of Worms, that's the way it's pronounced, not worms, but I mean, Martin got married. Here's a portrait of Martin Luther and his wife. They have children. Martin publishes many widely distributed books and pamphlets, and he writes many singable Reformation hymns, like one you sang today. Both words and music included. Today, a mighty fortress is our God. That was Martin Luther. In German, he wrote that in German. So the first time people understood the words of the music in their place of worship. The Radical Reformation. As the Lutheran form of Protestantism grew, so did other Protestant denominations founded on truths that their church leaders found to be significantly different from Lutheranism, that they had to go their own way and form their own denominations. I grew up in one of them, maybe you did too. At issue were the meaning of the Trinity, the significance of communion, the practice of baptism. 500 years ago, it mattered if you did not believe in the Holy Trinity. Holy Trinity of Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. It mattered if you thought Jesus was part of God or was he a separate part of God. It mattered what you believed about the symbolism of the bread and wine and significance of the communion service. For example, did the bread represent the real body of Christ, or was it symbolic only? You could be imprisoned in Zurich or be pushed off a cliff to drown in the river below. You could be hunted down and punished if you refused to have your child be baptized because you believed it should be an adult's choice to be baptized or not. I am a descendant of the Radical Reformation. My ancestors were Pennsylvania Swiss and German Anabaptists, Mennonite immigrants who fled persecution in Europe because of their commitment to Anabaptist beliefs. Michael Servetus. This is a portrait of him, a 16th century Spaniard from a noble family who emigrated to France as a 16-year-old to study. He excelled at languages and at reading the Bible. The Bible was new to him, so he had no previous biases about any of it, and he found Jesus to be especially interesting. In his own country, thousands of Jews and Muslims were deported or killed for refusing the doctrine of the Trinity. At 19, Servetus became a radical reformer, and in 1531, he published a long essay, a close analysis of biblical text, and called his essay, "On the Errors of the Trinity." Reaction against him was so great that he changed his name and he tried to hide. This man, John Calvin, became Michael Servetus' chief enemy, and things did not end well for Michael Servetus. He was tried by the Inquisition and escaped. I think I remember he jumped over a wall. Is that? Yeah. And the story goes that he then tried to hide in full sight from John Calvin by going to church. Everybody went to church. Nobody would notice him. But Michael Servetus was spotted and he was burned at the stake in Geneva. Because Servetus' anti-Trinitarianism included the idea that Jesus was God, incorporates the several features of several divergent ancient heresies, including Arianism. This book is a great source of UU history. It's called A Documentary History of Unitarian Universalism, Volume 1. It's mostly all primary sources with short intros, like the one I just quoted. I've always preferred learning and teaching from original documents and primary sources and coming to my own conclusions, thinking about things from the particular to the general, inductively. If we always look at things inside a box that others have decided for us all fit together, we miss things. Sometimes important things are people. So Arius, we'll see him, there he is. It has been with Arius, who was remembered in Emily's meditation earlier. Unitarian history is often unknown and misunderstood, and too often Unitarianism is believed to be a recent trend, as Emily told you. So it's good to be reminded that the writer Arius, a first-century radical reformer born in Africa, argued against the Trinitarian view of God, and for that, he was declared a heretic at the Council of Nicaea in the year 325. The oneness of God is a theme that runs through our Unitarian documents. Now think Transylvania, nowadays a part of Romania. I'm starting to wrap up. There are 2 more slides after this one. The Edict of Torda, the patent of toleration, is an important 16th century Unitarian document identified with a radical reformation. Francis David wrote this edict. He was the court preacher to Transylvanian King John Sigismund Zapolya. King John converted to Unitarianism and invited Francis David to write an edict that could demonstrate religious toleration in that it grants freedom of practice to 4 churches, Lutheran, Calvinist, Catholic, and Unitarian, rather than to a single religion of state. Now his mother. Not his mother. Who is this? This is King Sigismund's mother. Who is she and what is she doing here? Well, I invited her. She was famous and a famous artist, painted her. This is a painting by Louis Cranach the Younger in 1553. Her name is Isabella Jagiellon. I think that's pretty close. Her father was the King of Poland, and her mother was Italian. She is King Sigismund's mother and Queen Consort of Hungary, born in Krakow, Poland in 1519 and died in Romania 40 years later. From what is known about her, it's likely it was her suggestion to ask Francis David to write the Edict of Toleration. Besides, all this history has been about men. There were always women being punished and put to death for anti-Trinitarian beliefs, except in Unitarian areas where your religion was accepted. But this woman studied the philosopher Erasmus. We'll save him for another day. She was an influencer. She believed Egi as isten, God is one. She believed in the healing that a welcoming Unitarian congregation can bring to its people and community with the message that God is one.
And so as we prepare to go into the rest of this day and the week to come, continue your journey with love. That's what we can take care of. We can't control what everyone else does, but we can control our response. Continue your journey with love. Care for one another. Care for this one earth. Do justice and make peace. And as you go, whatever taste or touch you've had in this time and place, even just a little bit more hope or love or joy, if you've sensed that goes with you into the world. We're different for having spent this time together. And even in this hard time, continue to look for all that remains good and true and beautiful. May you live boldly. May you live with thanksgiving.